Already? Yep, lucky you. I got a letter from one of my followers that I'd like to share with y'all. Dear Nicholas, like thousands of others, I follow both your video blog and your written blog, which are both called Scribble Theology. I get that your video blog is about stuff like religion and God, but your written blog is just a bunch of bad poems and stories that nobody cares about. Why is that theology? Sincerely, Annabelle Baptiste. Well, Annabelle, I'm glad you asked. I think it's high time I did a Scribble Theology about theology. That's theology, not theology, the new coffee shop and emergent church downtown. Theology comes from the Greek theos, meaning God, and logia, meaning discourse. So you might define theology as talking about God. If your name is Merriam-Webster, you might prefer the study of religious faith, practice, and experience, especially the study of God and God's relation to the world. The short definition belies a difficult, if not impossible, undertaking. In Judaism, there's a long-standing tradition of substituting the letters YHWH for references to God, because the name of God is considered too holy to be written or spoken. Some Christians also use G-D instead of God. So the question becomes, if something is so far beyond us that we can't even name it, how can we hope to describe it? Even God herself, when Moses asks her name, says only, "I am who I am."
I'm Popeye the Sailor Man.
So instead of just asking God about God, we have to do some detective work. Now, there are various sources of information about God. The Bible, yes, but also our own experience, reason, and the church. Depending on where you think our information should come from, you might be one of various kinds of theologians. Biblical theologians try to learn about God by studying what the Bible says about God. The last 2,000 years don't matter because God hasn't really been doing anything. Natural theologians prefer to focus on what we can learn about God by observing the universe. If you walk around staring at trees long enough, you'll be able to figure out Levitical law all on your own. Now, Karl Barth thought that natural theology was completely useless because the best way to learn about the Creator is to sit in a building, read a bunch of books written by humans, and think really hard. Dogmatic theologians, okay, this is funny. Theology.edu says, dogmatic theology refers to those elements of theological truth which are absolutely certain. It will avoid controversial fields of study and will concentrate on those points about which the Church throughout history has held to unswervingly. Here, I made a list. Anyway, it's not all cut and dry. There are constructive theology and systematic theology, which may or may not be synonyms for dogmatic theology depending on whom you ask, and then there are theologies of interest, like liberation theology and feminist theology. But what does all this have to do with my bad poetry and uninteresting stories? Well, now you get to hear a little bit of Nico theology. If we take seriously the central Christian claim of atonement, an at-one-ment between creator and creation, then all of creation is necessarily connected with God. So we don't actually have to be talking about God to be talking about God. Anytime we try to dig a little deeper, search for meaning, make sense of things, we're doing theology. Pretty much everyone does theology. Preachers, prophets, poets, activists, writers, counselors, and you. A common misperception, though, is that theology students do theology. Theology students are actually engaged in a discipline known as theologyology, or talking about God, kind of like I am right now. But why does theology matter? First, it's important to understand that there are words for what you believe. It's not just the way things are, and other people are going to have different words for the way things are. Second, theology kills. Often the God of bad or unexamined theologies is a really undesirable God. And our history books are full of people doing violence in the name of a violent God. When what you see in God starts to feel unpalatable, it's time to start questioning that God.
What does God need with a starship?
And it's been through doing theology that people have come to condemn slavery, racism, sexism, genocide, the destruction of the environment. Theology saves. Of course, believing the right thing does not necessarily lead to doing the right thing. I have complete faith in the inerrancy of my recipe book, but you do not want to eat what I cook. So, Annabelle Baptiste, I do theology, and so do you. Karl Barth said,